The street was quiet, too quiet for the hour. Sodium lights poured their tired orange over the asphalt, leaving pools of dull glow between stretches of darkness. The night air was motionless, heavy, as if the whole block were holding its breath. Marcia Ellison drove 5 miles under the limit, her hands fixed at 10 and 2, a habit learned through repetition, honed over decades of careful existence. The road was empty, but she still checked her mirrors every few seconds, a rhythm of vigilance that never left her. The first flash of red and blue appeared in the mirror like a pulse from another world. She didn't flinch. She didn't curse. She simply exhaled once, long and steady, before signaling and pulling to the curb. The patrol car drew up behind her, its lights carving harsh reflections on the wet street. In her side mirror, the world broke into alternating flashes. Red, blue, justice and violence, order and chaos, flickering across her face. Inside the car, the radio crackled faintly. The voice of a dispatcher murmured something unintelligible, then faded into static. The silence that followed was total. Marcia rested her right hand on the steering wheel and kept the left visible on the window ledge. She rolled the window halfway down. The cold night air smelled faintly of oil and distant rain. A car door opened behind her, then another. 2 sets of footsteps approached, heavy with authority. The rhythm of the steps was practiced, slow enough to project calm, loud enough to announce power. "Evening, ma'am," one of them said. His voice was easy, rehearsed, the kind of tone reserved for people who had already decided who they were talking to. Marcia nodded once. "Evening, officer." The beam of his flashlight swept across her dashboard, her hands, her purse on the passenger seat. The light lingered, not searching for something specific, but reminding her who owned the night. "License and registration," he said. "They're in the glove compartment. Go ahead." She moved slowly, deliberately, narrating every motion. Opening the compartment now. Her voice was calm, measured, a quiet metronome counting out her survival. The second officer stood a little behind, his hand resting casually on the holster. His jaw moved as if chewing something invisible. His eyes never blinked. The document slid from her fingers, slightly damp with sweat. She handed them through the window. "Marcia Ellison," the first officer read, the syllables weighed and sorted. "You know why we pulled you over tonight?" "No, officer." "You rolled through a stop sign back there." Her heart didn't speed up. Her breathing stayed even. She hadn't rolled through anything. But truth was not the relevant currency here. "I see," she said. He nodded as if confirming an answer on a test. "You from around here?" "Yes." He looked at her registration again. "This is your vehicle?" "It is." The pause stretched thin. He turned to his partner, something wordless passing between them. Not conspiracy, just routine. The second officer stepped closer, the shine of his badge catching the red-blue pulse from behind. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Marcia blinked once. "For what reason?" The first officer's expression didn't change. "Just step out, please." The night was soundless except for the ticking of her car's cooling engine. Marcia's hands tightened once on the steering wheel, then released. She opened the door and stepped into the glare. The air outside was colder than she'd expected. She could feel the warmth of the patrol car's headlights on her back and the faint vibration of its running engine beneath her feet. Her own reflection shimmered in the side window, fragmented by the flashing lights. "Turn around." Hands on the hood, she obeyed. The metal was slick, faintly warm. Her face tilted downward, watching her own shadow flicker between the colors. The officers spoke to each other in low voices. Procedural murmurs, coded phrases. Their words carried the sterile rhythm of bureaucracy, as though this moment were merely paperwork in motion. Marcia said nothing. She didn't look up. Her silence was not submission. It was architecture, the scaffolding that kept her dignity upright when the world tried to dismantle it. A radio clicked. "Dispatch, 23 Alpha requesting plate verification." Static. Then confirmation. The first officer came around to face her. "You got anything in the car we should know about?" "No? No weapons? No substances?" "No." He studied her for a long moment, the flashlight beam grazing her cheek. "You seem nervous," she met his eyes. "I'm cold," he smiled, thin, empty. "You can wait in the cruiser while we run your info." "I'd prefer to stay here." Another pause. Another silent exchange between them. The kind of glance men used when the outcome was already decided. The second officer opened the back door of their cruiser anyway. The interior light spilled out, sterile and white. "Ma'am," the first said again, softer this time, but no less absolute. Marcia looked at the light. It wasn't warm. It wasn't safe. It was the color of hospitals, of rooms where people signed forms they didn't understand. She stood still for 3 long seconds, long enough for the silence to become its own defiance. Then she moved. She slid into the back seat, her posture rigid, her purse left behind on her passenger seat. The door closed with a muted mechanical finality. The smell of vinyl and disinfectant filled her lungs. Outside, the officers talked near her car. Their laughter, low, unguarded, carried across the empty street. It wasn't cruel laughter, not exactly. It was procedural. The laughter of men doing a job that required them not to think too much about the people inside it. Through the cruiser's window, Marcia watched her own taillights blink. Red, blue. Red, blue. Each flash seemed slower now, heavier, like the heartbeat of something immense and indifferent. She rested her hands in her lap. The left still trembled slightly, though she wouldn't admit it to herself. The hum of the cruiser engine vibrated up through the seat into her spine. She thought of Isaiah, how he used to check the locks twice before bed, how he stood a little straighter after boot camp. The station smelled of disinfectant and old coffee, that sour, metallic scent of places that never truly sleep. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a continuous electric hum that flattened everything beneath it. Color, warmth, individuality. The walls were painted in some shade of beige intended to soothe, but it only amplified the emptiness. Marcia Ellison sat on a molded plastic chair near the intake desk, wrists resting on her knees. She had been brought in for non-compliance. No explanation beyond that, no specifics. The officer who wrote the report hadn't looked at her when he filled it out. His pen moved like a machine, each stroke confident, efficient, practiced. Her license lay on the counter before him, a thin rectangle of plastic. All her history, her address, her name reduced to lamination. The light caught the hologram on its surface, making her picture shimmer faintly, like something both present and erased. "Marcia Ellison," the clerk said, not looking up. 47. He paused, typing something into the computer. The sound of keys clicking echoed in the room. "Occupation?" "Administrative assistant." He nodded without interest. "Employer?" "County Housing Office." "Any prior arrest?" "No." He made a small sound, not disbelief, not acknowledgement, just data processing. "Sign here." He pushed a form across the counter. Marcia signed. Her hand shook slightly from the cold, not from fear. The pen was cheap, the ink uneven. Her name looked frail on the page, as if it could be scraped away. Another officer approached, carrying a clipboard. "We'll need her prints," he said. The first officer shrugged. "You can take her back." Marcia stood. The room felt smaller as she moved, the ceiling lower. The officer led her down a hallway lined with metal doors and bulletin boards cluttered with memos and motivational posters. Integrity, service, accountability, each word printed over the image of an American flag. The edges of the posters curled with age. The fingerprint room was colder still. A single desk, a scanner, a camera mounted on a metal pole. The hum of the fluorescent light above seemed louder here, amplified by the white tile floor. "Hands," the officer said. She held them out. He guided her fingers onto the glass surface. The machine beeped, captured her prints, asked for each finger again. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. The computer clicked. "Left thumb." The hum continued. When it was over, she wiped her hands on her jeans, leaving faint smudges of ink gray. The officer handed her a form. "Initial there." And there, her initials joined the rows of printed boxes like another data point, another compliance. Back in the main room, the clock above the desk read 1:42 a.m. Time moved differently inside the building, slower, heavier, stripped of sequence. The officers moved through it like inhabitants of another species, adapted to the artificial light. "Sit tight," one said. "We'll see what the lieutenant wants to do." Marcia sat again. The chair creaked beneath her. Across the room, 2 younger officers leaned over a desk, laughing quietly at something on a phone screen. Their laughter didn't belong here. It had the easy warmth of people certain they were safe. Marcia looked at the clock again. 46. Her purse sat on the floor beside her chair, opened, rummaged through. Her keys were gone. Her phone sealed in a plastic bag on the counter. The bag had a number on it. Property, evidence, date. Everything about her life could apparently be catalogued. She studied her driver's license still lying under the clerk's elbow. The photograph showed her in neutral light, chin slightly tilted, eyes forward. She remembered the day it was taken. Fluorescent lighting there too, but gentler somehow. Bureaucratic but harmless. The woman in the photo looked calm, orderly, respectable. The kind of woman the world should have no quarrel with. Now that same image lay face up. A silent accusation of its own irrelevance. "Ms. Ellison," a voice called from behind a glass partition. It was the lieutenant, older, heavier, voice roughened by years of authority. "You understand why you're here?" Marcia turned to face the glass. "I was told non-compliance." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the counter. "You refused a lawful order to exit the vehicle. I exited when instructed." He glanced at the report in front of him. "It says otherwise." "I suppose it does." He squinted as if testing her tone. "You have an attitude problem, Ms. Ellison?" "No, sir." He waited, expecting more, but she didn't continue. Silence filled the space between them. Not hostile, just precise. Finally, he said, "You're free to go. A citation will be filed. You'll be contacted." Marcia didn't move immediately. She looked again at the counter. At her license, her purse, the property bag. "May I have my belongings?" The lieutenant gestured to the clerk. "Return her items." The clerk placed the bag and license on the counter without a word. Marcia picked up the license last. For a brief moment, she held it between her fingers, feeling the cool plastic, the slight raised texture of the numbers. It looked clean, intact, but it was no longer innocent. It had passed through their hands. When she stepped outside, the air was damp and still. The station's exterior lights cast hard shadows on the pavement, carving lines between brightness and void. Her reflection appeared again in the glass door, faint, doubled by the light behind her. She walked to her car, parked crookedly under a security lamp. The engine hesitated before starting. In the rear-view mirror, the station loomed. An unremarkable building, square, bland, forgettable. That was its strength. It didn't need to intimidate. It only needed to exist. Its power came from procedure, not personality. Marcia adjusted the mirror. The license sat on the passenger seat beside her. For a long moment, she stared at it. The photograph looked back, composed, contained. But now, under the weak dome light of her car, it seemed different. The eyes were the same, but they carried knowledge now, the kind that comes from understanding precise. The call came just before dawn, the hour when silence feels most like a verdict. Isaiah Ellison sat at his kitchen table, half-dressed, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. The apartment was spare, not barren, just disciplined. The kind of order that came from habit, not taste. His uniform hung neatly on the back of a door, its creases sharp enough to suggest control rather than pride. The boots beneath it were cleaned to regulation gloss, even though he had no formation to stand in anymore. The phone vibrated once on the counter. He didn't rush. He let it ring a second time, then a third. When he finally answered, his voice was steady, almost indifferent. "Ellison." A pause, then a woman's voice, soft but official. "Mr. Ellison? This is Elaine Porter with the Public Defender's Office. I'm calling regarding your mother, Marcia Ellison." His grip on the phone tightened slightly. "Go ahead. She was detained overnight. She's been released, but there's a pending citation for non-compliance. She listed you as her emergency contact. What happened?" "The report says she was stopped for a traffic violation and..." He interrupted. "Where?" "Local precinct, downtown division." He exhaled slowly through his nose, the sound quiet but deliberate. "Is she home?" "Yes, she's fine physically. She didn't request representation, but she wanted you informed." Isaiah looked at the wall, a blank white expanse lit by early gray light. "Thank you," he said. The line stayed open for half a second longer, as if the woman wanted to say something else. But she didn't. The call ended with a soft click, and the silence that followed seemed to deepen the room. He sat without moving. The steam from his coffee had stopped rising. On the table before him lay a single sheet of paper, a copy of his discharge orders. It had been there for weeks. He hadn't filed it, hadn't thrown it away, just left it there like something unresolved. He reached for his dog tags instead. They hung from a nail near the kitchen window, the metal dull from years of wear. He held them in his hand, the chain coiled around his fingers. The edges were cool, familiar. Each tag bore his name, number, blood type. Information stripped to its essentials, the kind that mattered in systems built for efficiency. He'd once believed those numbers meant belonging. Now they just looked like another form of ownership. The morning light crept across the floor, climbing over the edge of the table, brushing against his forearm. The rhythm of it felt almost military, measured, precise. He placed the tags back down. The metal hit the table with a small, definitive sound. He rose, moved to the window. The city outside was waking. Delivery trucks, commuters. The low, mechanical hum of normal life beginning again. It was all so ordinary, and that was what made it unbearable. Somewhere in that machinery his mother had been processed. Not assaulted, not beaten, just processed. That was the violence, the quiet kind. The kind that came with paperwork and procedure. He had seen other systems like that, overseas under different flags. The details changed, but the rhythm was the same: command, compliance, containment. He turned back to the kitchen. The coffee had gone cold. He drank it anyway. On the counter lay a photo, one of the few he'd bothered to keep framed. It showed him and Marcia at his boot camp graduation. She stood beside him, eyes proud but cautious, as if she were afraid to trust the safety that uniform promised. He'd laughed at that then. He didn't laugh now. The phone buzzed again. A text from her this time. "Home, don't worry. Everything's fine." He read it twice. The words were clean, measured, her version of armor. He typed back, "I'm coming by," then deleted it, then typed it again. Finally, he set the phone down. He couldn't move yet. Movement would make it real. He sat again, elbows on the table, head bowed slightly. His posture was perfect. The kind that looked calm but came from control, not peace. In the corner of the room, the uniform hung like a question. He remembered his first commanding officer telling him that discipline was the art of containing violence until the moment it became necessary. That definition had made sense to him once. Now it sounded like prophecy. He rose, walked toward the door, then stopped. The apartment's silence pressed against him, dense and physical. He looked at the dog tags one more time, still resting on the table. The chain had curled into itself, forming a near-perfect circle. A boundary, a loop, a closed system. He slipped them into his pocket. When he stepped outside, the air was sharp, clean, indifferent. The world did not acknowledge what had happened. It didn't need to. That was part of the system, too. Its invisibility. He walked to his car, parked along the curb. Inside, he sat for a long moment before starting the engine. The sound of the ignition filled the cabin, mechanical and certain. In the rearview mirror, his eyes looked different, harder, stiller. The same calm he'd been trained to wear before entering unknown territory. The city stretched before him, lit by the first weak gold of morning. Commuters filled the streets, faces blank, routines intact. None of them knew that the night before, in a room with buzzing lights and beige walls, his mother's humanity had been weighed and found inconvenient. He rested one hand on the steering wheel, the other on the chain in his pocket. The metal was warm now, shaped by his palm. "Fine," she'd said. Fine was the language of survival. He knew that tone. He'd used it himself after patrols, after things no one at home wanted to understand. Fine meant alive. Fine meant unbroken. Fine meant not yet finished. He pulled into traffic. The city moved around him like an organism, each part serving its function, blind to its own design. He followed its rhythm, blending into its pattern. A soldier returning to a different kind of war. At the next red light, he caught his reflection in the side mirror. Behind him, the streetlight flickered. Red, then blue. Justice, violence, order, chaos. The same pulse his mother had seen. The color. The police station looked different in daylight. Its edges were too clean, its glass too reflective, its stillness too deliberate. The flag outside moved without conviction, the wind tugging at it half-heartedly. Inside, the fluorescent light remained unchanged, indifferent to hour or purpose. Isaiah Ellison stood at the entrance for a full minute before going in. He wanted to see it the way his mother must have. The shape of the place, the precision of its design. He noted the cameras over the door, the intercom button smudged by countless fingers, the notice board cluttered with community trust posters. Their slogans sounded like threats disguised as promises. He pushed the door open. The air inside was conditioned to a temperature slightly colder than comfort, the kind that made a person aware of their own breathing. The front desk officer looked up, not from interest but reflex. "Can I help you?" Isaiah didn't answer immediately. His gaze swept the lobby. A waiting area with 4 molded chairs, a coffee machine that hadn't been wiped, a row of filing cabinets. The sound of a printer hummed in the background, faint but constant. "My name's Isaiah Ellison," he said finally. "I'm here about an incident involving my mother, Marcia Ellison." The officer blinked. "What kind of incident?" "She was detained last night." He began typing, eyes on the monitor. "One moment." Isaiah waited. His posture was straight but not stiff, his hands at his sides. His silence had weight. It filled the room, displacing the easy rhythm of bureaucracy. The officer glanced up again. "She's been released." "I know." "What's the issue, then?" Isaiah's eyes met his. "I'd like to speak with whoever processed her." That drew the first flicker of discomfort. The officer's gaze shifted, searching for a procedural escape. "That's not standard protocol." Neither was what happened to her. The words came out evenly, no raised tone, no visible anger, just clarity. The kind of voice used in command briefings, where truth was spoken without apology. The officer hesitated, then picked up a phone. His voice lowered as he spoke into it, eyes darting toward Isaiah twice during the call. Across the lobby, a clock ticked above the door. Each second landed with mechanical precision, louder than necessary. It was the only sound that didn't bend to human rhythm. Isaiah sat down, folding his hands on his knees. He stared at that clock. Its face was blank white, its numbers black, efficient, unadorned. Time was moving, but not for him. When the door to the interior hallway finally opened, another officer appeared, older, broader, his expression carrying the permanent exhaustion of authority. "Mr. Ellison?" "Lieutenant Harris. I can speak with you for a moment." Isaiah rose. "That'll do." The lieutenant led him down a hallway lined with plexiglass partitions. Each office they passed was a cube of paperwork and flickering monitors. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and toner ink. They stopped in a small interview room. No windows, just a table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs and a camera mounted in the corner, its red light steady. "Have a seat," Harris said. Isaiah remained standing. The lieutenant sighed, the sound rehearsed. "Look, I read the report. Your mother wasn't charged. Sometimes things get misinterpreted in the field. I'm sure she told you that. She told me she was compliant." Harris folded his arms. "That's not what the officers wrote. I didn't expect it was." The air between them tightened. The hum of the ceiling light seemed louder here, its frequency faintly uneven, like a nerve misfiring. "Sir?" the lieutenant said finally, shifting his stance. "I understand your concern, but unless you're filing a formal complaint, there's nothing more to discuss." Isaiah studied him for a long moment. "Then consider this the beginning of one." Harris blinked. "Are you alleging misconduct?" "I'm stating fact." The lieutenant's jaw worked. "You military?" Isaiah nodded once. Harris exhaled. "Then you know how it is. People make quick calls under pressure. Not everything's about control." Isaiah interrupted. The lieutenant stopped mid-word. "What?" "You said pressure. Pressure comes from control. You've built a system where control means safety. For you, not for her." Harris opened his mouth, closed it again. The silence stretched. The red light of the camera blinked once, steady again. Isaiah took one step closer to the table. "I just came to see the place. To understand the air she was breathing when you processed her, that's all." He said it quietly, but it unsettled the room. The lieutenant's hand brushed his belt instinctively. Not for his weapon, just for balance. "You've seen it. Now you can go." Isaiah's gaze drifted back to the clock above the door. Its ticking was steady, relentless. Each second landed like a reminder of who dictated time here. He nodded once. "You ever notice how loud that clock is?" The lieutenant frowned. "What?" "In every room like this, hospitals, stations, bases, there's always a clock that ticks louder than it should. It's how the system talks, quietly, repetitively. It tells you you're waiting for permission. He didn't expect an answer. When he finally turned to leave, Harris didn't stop him. The door opened with a hydraulic hiss, then closed again with the same indifferent precision. Back in the lobby, the same officer sat at the desk, pretending not to watch him. Isaiah walked past, his boots quiet on the tile. The sound of the clock followed him out. Tick, 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 see, until the glass doors swallowed it. Outside, the afternoon sun had turned white and flat. Shadows had no depth here. They just clung to the edges of things. He stood on the steps, breathing air that still smelled faintly of disinfectant. Across the parking lot, 2 patrol cars idled, their engines low and constant. Officers moved between them, casual, chatting, unaware of him. He could have spoken to them. He could have demanded names, apologies, accountability. But he understood the futility of demanding humanity from a machine. The system had no face, only badges and paperwork. He reached into his pocket, felt the dog tags. The chain coiled around his fingers, metal clicking softly against itself. Another clock, another rhythm. For a brief moment, he imagined the sound syncing with the ticking from inside the station. 2 rhythms meeting, one mechanical, one human. He let the tags fall back into his pocket and began to walk. Behind him, the station's glass facade reflected the sky in distorted fragments. Blue fractured by steel. The break didn't come suddenly. It arrived the way all collapses do. Slowly, through repetition, through the soft corrosion of restraint. Isaiah returned to the station the next day. Not out of recklessness, but clarity. His mother had told him not to, her voice steady, tired, carrying that subtle tremor of people who have spent their whole lives accommodating systems designed to misunderstand them. Let it go, she'd said. But some things refused release. He parked across the street. The sun was high, flattening the world into sterile brightness. The building looked smaller now, but no less fortified. Inside, the same officer sat behind the front desk. The same clock ticked above him, its rhythm clinical, exact. Isaiah approached. Lieutenant Harris in? The officer didn't look up. He's busy. I'll wait. He sat again in the same molded chair, the same light drilling down from above. His stillness filled the room like pressure in a sealed chamber. After a few minutes, another officer came through the hallway, younger, pale-skinned. His smile casual in the way men smile when they believe the world's shape favors them. His badge caught the light as he passed. He stopped when he recognized Isaiah. Back again? Isaiah didn't answer. Looking for your mom's apology? The officer said, grinning. Or maybe you're filing one. The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. The clerk behind the desk pretended to type. The clock ticked louder. Isaiah turned his head slightly, just enough to meet the officer's eyes. Say that again, the grin flickered. Then returned, just saying. Maybe she shouldn't have made things harder than they had to be. We all got jobs, man. There it was, the gesture. A small shrug, one shoulder raised, a tilt of the mouth. The choreography of indifference. Isaiah rose slowly. The chair legs scraped against the floor. A small sound, but sharp enough to slice the air. Back off, the desk officer said, voice tight now. Isaiah took one step forward, then another. His movement wasn't impulsive. It was exact, measured, military. The space between them collapsed into inches. You talk about her again, he said quietly, and you'll understand pressure. The officer's smile faltered. You threatening a cop? No, Isaiah said. I'm defining consequence. The younger man reached for his belt. It was instinct, not decision. But Isaiah was faster. Not in fury, but in precision. His hand closed around the officer's wrist, pivoted it downward. The movement was clean, almost gentle until the sound came. A dull crack. A collapse of control. The officer gasped, staggered, his arm bent wrong. The other officer shouted. Isaiah moved once more. A short, efficient strike to the chest, not enough to break, just enough to silence. The man fell backward into the counter, papers scattering. The printer toppling, and then it was quiet for a second. The only sound was the clock. Tick, tick, tick. The air smelled faintly of metal, not blood yet, but anticipation. The younger officer tried to stand, his breath wheezing through his teeth. Isaiah didn't move toward him again. He just stood there, chest rising and falling slowly, eyes calm. You don't get to talk about her, he said. The words were low, almost tender. Then he turned and walked toward the door. He made it 3 steps before the first alarm sounded, a metallic chirp, then a blare. Boots pounded in the hallway. The clerk shouted something into the intercom. Isaiah stopped. The light overhead flickered once. The sound of sirens began outside, not distant but close, circling like a closing argument. He looked down. Blood, not much, just a few drops, had hit the floor. They spread across the polished tile in small, deliberate arcs. The stain caught the fluorescent glare, turning it into something redder, truer. He knelt once, slowly, as if examining the evidence of his own action. The blood was bright, fresh, not rage, but consequence made visible. Behind him, officers burst through the door, shouting orders. "Hands up! Down on the ground!" Isaiah didn't move immediately. His reflection shimmered in the floor, fractured by the blood between tiles. He raised his hands finally, palms open. His voice when he spoke was steady. "It's done." The command tone carried through the noise, cutting it in half. Even the shouting seemed to hesitate. 2 officers approached cautiously. One holstered his weapon, cuffed Isaiah's wrists behind him. The metal bit into skin still damp with sweat. As they let him out, the blood remained behind. Small, circular, drying into permanence. A record of something the system couldn't file away as easily as paperwork. The lobby doors opened. Daylight poured in, bright and unkind. The sirens outside pulsed rhythmically, blending with the echo of the clock still ticking inside. They pushed him into the back of a cruiser. The seat was hard plastic, the smell of disinfectant sharp enough to burn. The window next to him reflected a fragmented view. The station facade, the flag moving weakly, the cluster of officers talking among themselves. He turned his head slightly, catching sight of the tiles through the open doorway. The blood was still there. No one had cleaned it yet. A stain on procedure. The engine started. The cruiser moved. The building was the same color as the idea of order. Beige, flat, without shadow. Inside, it smelled of toner, coffee, and policy. Marcia Ellison stood at the podium of the review board chamber, a narrow room lined with glass panels and American flags. Behind her, microphones blinked red. In front, 5 officials sat in symmetrical stillness. Each wore a nameplate and a practiced face. The proceedings were administrative, not judicial. The system reviewing itself under fluorescent light. A woman from Internal Affairs began. "Mrs. Ellison, you understand these hearings are not criminal in nature, but rather procedural," Marcia finished. Her voice was even, calm, uninflected. The woman hesitated. "Yes, procedural." Marcia's hands rested on the table, palms open, motionless. Her wrists still bore faint bruises from the cuffs, yellowed now, fading but not forgotten. She had declined counsel, declined to make statements through a representative, declined apology. Behind her, a low hum filled the air, the ventilation system, or perhaps the tension of people observing from behind glass. Among them sat journalists, a few community leaders, and the kind of onlookers who mistake proximity for participation. On a screen above, footage from the station played on loop. No sound, just images. Isaiah standing, officers shouting, movement blurring into violence, then stillness. The footage was precise, impartial, and blind. A man on the panel cleared his throat. "We understand your son is currently in federal custody pending review. Are you aware that he—" "I'm aware," she said. "You haven't issued a statement on his behalf?" "No." The man frowned slightly, as if confused by restraint. "Would you like to for the record?" Marcia looked up. Her eyes were steady, dark pools that reflected nothing. "What record would that be?" The question hung longer than intended. One of the officials shifted, uncomfortable. The clerk typed something anyway because the system demands every silence be filled with language. Marcia continued. "You'll file your reports. You'll discuss procedure. You'll document my words. But none of you will remember what it felt like to watch him be dragged away. Because feeling isn't procedural." The chairwoman leaned forward. "Mrs. Ellison, this isn't an emotional proceeding." "I know." Her tone did not rise. "That's the problem." A pause. Then the sound of typing resumed, sharp and rhythmic. The footage looped again. Isaiah's body in motion, officers falling back, red spilling on the floor like punctuation. Marcia watched once more, not flinching, not blinking. You have the video, she said. That's all you'll ever see. From the back of the room, a camera flash popped. The journalists were already composing headlines, translating grief into language that fit the morning's layout. Marine son of detained woman attacks police in local station. The story had already been flattened. Conflict without context, action without motive. The board moved on. Policies cited, procedures reviewed, recommendations drafted. The script of containment unfolding word by word. When the session adjourned, Marcia remained seated until the room emptied. The hum of the lights filled the silence. On the table, a paper cup of water remained untouched. She watched the reflection of her own face in it, distorted, trembling with the air conditioning. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. Not peace, just continuation. The holding facility was 20 miles away, beyond the county line. Built in the post-9/11 style of permanence, gray concrete, mirrored glass, invisible perimeters. Isaiah sat in a visitation booth. The plexiglass between them was spotless, his reflection clear, as if the system wanted him to see himself the way it saw him. Contained, categorized, corrected. Marcia entered quietly. Her clothes were simple, her posture straight. They didn't speak immediately. The air carried that faint buzz of fluorescent voltage, the sound of silence institutionalized. Finally, she said, "You're eating?" He nodded. Enough. She looked at him, at the cut on his cheek, the bruise at his temple. "They hurt you?" He shook his head. "They can't." It wasn't bravado. It was fact. Marcia studied his eyes. They were steady, unbroken. The same discipline she'd seen in him as a boy, holding his breath underwater longer than anyone else, just to prove control over his own body. "They say you're uncooperative," she said. "I told them what happened. And they called it assault." She smiled faintly, a tired, knowing curve of the mouth. "They always do." Silence again. The clock above the door ticked evenly, marking time in government-approved increments. Finally, she said, "I watched the tape." He looked up. "And? They won't see what I saw." He nodded slowly. "They never do." Marcia leaned closer to the glass. "They'll make this about your anger. Then let them." She pressed her palm against the glass. He mirrored it. Skin to surface, not touch but approximation. The glass was cool, indifferent. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. He didn't smile. "You shouldn't be." "I am." The red light above the camera blinked once, recording. Every second captured, archived, labeled. They sat like that until the guard approached. Time had run out. The system, efficient as ever, reclaimed its schedule. As she stood, Isaiah said softly, "They'll rewrite it all. Make it look like it never happened." Marcia paused, hand on the chair. "Then we'll remember for them." She left without looking back. Weeks passed. Hearings multiplied. Articles appeared, then vanished beneath new headlines. The footage circulated online briefly, stripped of context, spliced into outrage. The world moved on,